Just stand, just like the arrow view. Well, thank everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. Many, if not most of you, have been here at least once and maybe twice before, probably twice. I think almost everybody. So you've batted all 3 times here and done well. A lot of the conversations and notes and comments that you have made in the previous workshops have been incorporated, and if they haven't been, they've been pretty thoroughly considered of how all that might work. One thing to keep in mind as we're looking through all this is that this is a vision. This is where we want to be down the road. So, if you happen to see something that doesn't fit with the current use, try to keep that in mind. Nobody's going to run out there and change the existing use because of this, or put pressure on anybody. But as things change, and as different kinds of development pressures and perhaps availability of new kinds of investment and those kind of things, property values change. We need to have, we at MRA in the city, and I think the community too, needs to have some sort of an idea of where that should go, rather than try to do it ad hoc, one project at a time. And so that's what we're trying to do here. This will end up being a guide for MRA and its investment strategies and prioritizing how it promotes certain kinds of uses in this area. It will move through other processes at the city. We're trying to figure out how it fits with the growth policy, how it fits with other kinds of planning efforts and so on. But I think that it is important, and I really appreciate your taking time out of your evening to come in and work with us one more time. This is a project that Missouri Development Agency sponsored. The consultant team you've met before from WGM. The folks from Winter and Company aren't here today, but you've met them before, most of you have. And Urban Advisors has done an amazing job looking at the economics and the kind of forecasting the economics that has guided a lot of the planning. This isn't just what we think ought to be nice for our community. It's had to go through a sieve of making sense, at least in the way that we can try to forecast the future economy. Technical Advisory Committee, a very broad group of folks, mainly at the city, including elected officials and engineering and all that. That's another sieve that we kind of look to make sure that not only the planning efforts kind of fit with other plans that are in place and could come in place, but a reality check. So tonight, you guys have moved around a little bit, taking a look at some of this stuff. What we'll do now is Jeremy and Laval will have a short presentation, kind of give you some more specifics on how things work, and then we'll go back to looking at those things, all the different tables and stations with that knowledge, and be able to use what you've learned so far, what you'll learn in a few minutes, and hopefully have some more questions. Please go ahead and submit comments. That's important. Don't just hold them in and wait till later. Let's get them in now if possible. And you can actually add them through the websites and so on, or over the telephone if you want to. So again, thank you. Jeremy?
Hey, Chris. So we really do want to invite you to make comments. There's sticky notes on all the tables. You're welcome to write your comments on those notes, stick them on the map. You're also welcome to fill out a comment sheet, which was included with your agenda tonight. It's on the back side. Welcome to fill that out, hand it to us tonight, or send it in later. You're welcome to email me or call me on the phone and talk. So this isn't the only opportunity, but we are on track to wrap the plan up in a couple of weeks. We'd like to have all the comments in by October 5th. So that's 2 weeks from tonight. And that won't be the last step, but it's at least the point where we'd like to have what we think is a final plan that we can start through the adoption process. And Laval Means from Development Services is here tonight to talk about how that's going to work. We'll give you a pretty good roadmap of how the project is going to go forward into the adoption phase. So I hope you had a chance to go around the room and get familiar with what's on the walls. We have 4 stations set up tonight, starting with the Reserve Street area, what we called the industrial core, kind of the center of the project area, the Scott Street district, which is the east side, over by the north side neighborhood, and finally a station for transportation and connectivity and kind of the broader picture in the plan. So after we're done talking, we'll spread out around the room and we'll be available to answer your questions and take comments. And we'll stay here as long as you'd like to tonight. So again, thanks for coming. It's an exciting plan. There's a lot in there. If you looked at the document online, there's a lot of pages and there's a lot to read. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of what's in there, and then we can dive into details after we break down into the open house again. So why a master plan? This is really a guideline for the Missoula Redevelopment Agency to help them understand how they can invest in this district. In 2014, they created an urban renewal district, which is it's a funding mechanism to help with infrastructure as development happens. So that helped spur interest in the area, but there wasn't really a good roadmap for how development should occur and how the city can invest money in infrastructure. So the main intent of this plan is to help provide that guideline, and that'll also help guide regulatory changes that might happen in the future in the district. So the plan sets a long-term vision. It's about preserving options for the future and illustrating those opportunities. It provides information to landowners who may choose to develop their land, and it also helps as a decision-making guideline for government investments. The plan does not make changes. It does not force you to make changes to your property. It does not force you to develop your property in a particular way. It doesn't force you to change the zoning on your property. Those are all other steps that would happen in the future if and when they're necessary. So the plan is a guideline, it's a vision. The intent is to have a cohesive idea around what the district could be, and the elements of the plan will change and evolve over time, but we hope that what this gives us is a good roadmap for how to get to something that's meaningful and provides good investment in the district, both for private investment as well as public investment. So we've been working on this for just about a year. We originally met with you back in October of last year. Our first community workshop talked about what was there, what's existing today, and what kinds of constraints there were. Then we went into a phase of developing some concepts and some ideas. Came back in February and had a second community workshop to present those. And then over the last few months, we've been refining the land use and circulation concepts, writing design guidelines for the district, and developing a master plan report. And so tonight we have that master plan report available, and we're looking for your feedback on that. So we're a little bit behind the schedule we originally set out, but I think it's important that we took the time to talk to folks and to listen and make the changes in the plan that needed to be in there to really address all the issues. So going forward, what we'll be doing is looking at preparing a final master plan. That'll go to the Redevelopment Agency Board of Directors for their review and approval. And then there will be a step with the Planning Board and the City Council to formally adopt the plan. So this is really a community-driven effort. We really wanted to engage the stakeholders and general public in what goes into the plan. That doesn't mean we did exactly what everybody told us to do. When you do a plan like this, you have to meld a lot of different ideas, and the final step is to put our own professional advice and opinions into the plan to make sure that it works from a good land use perspective. So we had a great team, including Nori Winter and Brad Johnson with Winter and Company. They really helped us bring in an outside perspective, kind of a national perspective on what this district might look like, and so that helped shape the plan. It does consist of both city and county land. Currently, only the city land is part of the urban renewal district, but as land, if it were to annex into the city, it would become part of that district. And it's a very diverse area. There's a lot of different kinds of land uses. There's a lot of maybe incompatible uses that are happening in the district. So one of the goals was to try to develop a little bit more continuity between different land uses, maybe create some buffers and some transitions between those land uses so they can coexist a little bit better. And finally, looking at connectivity, there isn't a lot of connectivity through the district. There's relatively few roads and kind of limited opportunities to get around. So the plan also looks at what the existing utility infrastructure consists of. We looked at what environmental constraints are out there, what properties have constraints that might limit the development that could happen. And finally, as Chris said, we looked at the market demand. What kind of things can we expect to happen in Missoula and in this area? So at the core of the plan is the idea that we have some good existing industrial uses, some viable industry that's in this area, and we think that's an important anchor in the district. And so we wanted to make sure that we're able to retain those industries and provide opportunities for new industry and related businesses. So you'll see that as kind of a central theme in the plan. The vision also creates 3 unique sub-districts, and we called these the Reserve Street District, the Industrial Core, and the Scott Street District. And the idea there is that you create a unique identity for each one, and they're connected by a system of roads and trails and open spaces. So the idea is that this will create a more livable and business-friendly neighborhood within each one of those districts that can support new and existing development. So in the Reserve Street District, we're looking at more of a focus on commercial uses. In the Industrial Core, preserving the opportunity to have both heavy and light industrial and related commercial businesses. And in the Scott Street District, looking at the opportunity to expand residential uses, as well as the opportunity to do live-work developments, which could be kind of a unique opportunity in Missoula where there aren't very many places that can accommodate that. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So the specific land uses that we recommended are intended to create some synergies between different uses, as well as appropriate buffers between those uses. So we're trying to buffer some of the heavy industrial use from residential or commercial businesses that might not be very compatible. So you'll see in the different colors on the maps, different land use categories being described. Corridor retail is basically the kind of thing you see along Reserve Street, which really is businesses that rely on higher traffic and more visibility. The next tier is something we call transitional commercial, which is more neighborhood businesses and less auto-related businesses that start to transition into more of a professional office or other types of use. The office use accommodates a larger scale of professional offices and commercial uses. These would be more multi-story buildings, similar to what we see going in there with the Consumer Direct project. And then as we move into the industrial area, the idea of transitional industrial is really another way of saying light industrial. This could be research and development or storage or light manufacturing. Kinds of uses that don't have a large visual or physical impact on adjacent properties. And those make a good buffer for the heavy industrial area, which we call the industrial reserve. And the idea there is that we don't really have strong demand in Missoula or in the United States for that matter for big industry right now. We're not sure where that's headed. That could change. But this area it's compatible for industrial use, and it's a large land area, and so we think it's a good idea to preserve that opportunity for the future, so that it's there if we need it. And finally, the live-work residential, the idea that you can create spaces where you might incorporate light manufacturing or studio space with a residential living space, where you might be able to have an apartment or a shop in the same building, you live and work together. And the residential development ranges from single-family to multifamily development. It includes the idea of some neighborhood retail. This would be smaller commercial developments, things like bakeries or cafes, small grocery store, things like that. And finally, open space and park, which is an important supporting element for all of these different land uses. Circulation is going to be an important element for this area. We want to focus on pedestrian circulation, making that more safe and comfortable for people to move around on foot. We heard a lot of feedback on bicycle circulation, that this area gets used for not only recreational biking through the area, but people have a desire to be able to ride to work. And so we think that enhancing the bike network is an important part. And then finally, vehicle circulation, which we know it's still going to be in kind of an auto-dominated area with Reserve Street and with the heavy industry that relies on trucks. So making sure that we balance the ability to get vehicles in and around the district is important. We looked at a number of things relative to vehicle circulation, both kind of internal to the district, improvements to the street network, as well as more citywide regional improvements, with the idea that Missoula is very constrained with our north-south corridors, and looking at other opportunities to get both across the railroad and to the interstate in kind of the long-term planning for this district. The other thing that we looked at is truck routing and recognizing that there are certain areas, particularly residential areas, that aren't real compatible with having a lot of heavy truck traffic, and so providing some good truck routes to avoid going through neighborhoods was also a part of the plan. So as I said, the plan does include design guidelines, and these are intended to help balance the public realm, the street, with the private realm, with private buildings and private development. And what we want is for those to integrate and complement each other to create a good neighborhood, a good place. And at the neighborhood level, that would include consideration of how an individual development contributes to an overall functioning neighborhood. At the site design level, you look at how buildings are oriented and how the site is laid out. And finally, with the building itself, looking at good aesthetics on the architecture so that the building really complements the public space that is part of the street. So in the plan, there's a fairly comprehensive set of design guidelines to help at least provide guidance on how that development can happen. So I'm going to go very quickly through the different districts. This is the Reserve Street district, and it's really, as I said, anchored along Reserve Street with commercial development, a second tier of this transitional commercial, and kind of an office node around the Consumer Direct project. The area in purple is the transitional industrial. This would be light industrial uses that would help buffer the industrial core. Some of the design elements that we looked at were things like recognizing that there's some good view corridors from the interstate that you can see down into this area. There's opportunities for a gateway treatment. We think that Howard Racer Drive is probably the primary access to this district. It's going to be the gateway and the primary vehicle corridor. So making sure that street has a strong presence. And if you see the hatching here, this represents the areas that we think are important to orient the building to the street. And so the design guidelines include, sorry, I can't zoom in here. The design guidelines include trying to orient buildings to face those primary street corridors. So orienting towards Reserve Street and orienting towards Howard Racer Drive as important elements. And then the other streets that are part of this new grid network are maybe a little bit more landscape oriented and would help buffer where parking goes behind the buildings. So we have some examples of how that might look over on the walls here. illustrating how you might develop the Howard Racer Avenue corridor with buildings that front the street, pedestrian sidewalks, and we're suggesting a protected bikeway or a cycle track to help tie the trail connections together. The building types in the Reserve Street district we see is a lot of the single-story retail uses that you're seeing today, single-story multi-tenant, which we also see on Reserve Street, as well as more of the multi-story commercial office developments, light industrial focused buildings, and hospitality hotels. We're not seeing, or we don't recommend a big emphasis on residential development in the Reserve Street district, but we do see an opportunity eventually for vertical mixed use. So the idea that you could have upper floor residential uses happening in that Reserve Street corridor. This might be something that's a little bit further down the line in the development of the area. So in the industrial core, pretty simple land use plan, but industrial reserve is the main theme. The idea of a flex form, which is just to say that this would allow a lot of flexibility for different types of uses to happen here. There are road networks proposed that would support that development if and when it would happen. And those include some buffering with screening or landscaping to help kind of soften the edge of that industrial area. I think there's an opportunity for a gateway that's connected to a new interchange with I-90. And this is kind of a gateway to the district, and I think it's important that we noted and heard feedback from folks that they didn't really want to see this be another truck stop interchange. The commercial development at this area might not be compatible with the neighborhood and with what folks wanted to see. So the main intent here is to provide access to the industrial areas as well as residential areas, but not develop a big commercial presence there at that interchange. So building forms in the industrial core, what we'd envision is the manufacturing and processing type buildings similar to what you see out there today with the Roseburg plant. You could also see materials storage both in the form of tank farms, tank storage, or other open storage yards for materials and equipment. I think there's also some opportunities for warehousing, and then light industrial buildings and commercial office. And the office would be primarily a support for industrial users. So this might be corporate or office headquarters for industrial users in that district. So moving on to the Scott Street, this is the east side of the district. This has a fairly strong emphasis on residential uses, and those residential uses would be buffered by some live-work areas and the idea of transitional industrial. We've included a small note of neighborhood retail with the idea that that could be something like a small grocery store or cafe bakery that would provide convenient services to the neighborhood. The other thing, if you're really paying attention to these maps, is we're proposing to consolidate some of the land uses in here. Right now, it's a little bit mixed up with different property ownership and use, and we're suggesting that we look at consolidating the cemetery lands and city-owned lands and being able to develop more of the residential lands closer to the existing neighborhood. So some of the important concepts here, I already talked about the neighborhood node, the neighborhood commercial node. The idea of some kind of a neighborhood gateway, and then this is an important street that would be along the south edge of that district, which would provide circulation for trucks and a higher volume of traffic that would let this neighborhood be better connected to the existing north side neighborhood without a lot of pass-through traffic. So that's an important part. And then, of course, the proposed expansion of the cemetery could be could be both future cemetery use as well as open space or park uses that could be included there. We also recognize that there's an important trail system, the Northside Greenway, that ends at Scott Street, and being able to connect that with a new multi-use path, maybe an extension of that Northside Greenway to connect up to Grant Creek, would be a nice bicycle and pedestrian connection. So in the Scott Street district, what we envision is single-family homes, duplexes, as well as townhomes and apartments, either flats or apartments, kind of a minor difference between those two, but we're talking about multifamily housing. As well as the neighborhood commercial uses, either single-story retail buildings or multi-tenant single-story buildings. And that could also include multiple-story mixed-use developments where you have neighborhood retail uses on the first floor and some upper-floor residential. And finally, the idea of live-work. These are light industrial spaces where folks can have a space to live and a business to run in studio or manufacturing space. And just anecdotally, that's something we've heard that people are looking for, that those smaller business spaces are in demand, and people would like to see that kind of space available. So we tested all of this with our market feasibility. We also looked at utility infrastructure. What would it take to serve this development? What kinds of costs would be associated with it? And we looked at some traffic modeling to determine whether or not we had sufficient roadway network to support the traffic that will inevitably come with some of this development. So as Chris said, it's a plan backed up with a lot of good data. It's important that we try to plan with reality in mind, and that the plan actually has feasibility. And then the final part of the plan is to lay out a strategy for implementation. We proposed a strategy that really uses public infrastructure investment to help guide private development. So one of the important tools that the redevelopment agency has is to be able to provide public infrastructure when private development happens. We think that can help influence the way private development occurs and hopefully follows the guidelines in the plan. So there's a phasing plan to all of this. This is a little bit of a crystal ball because most of this plan will be development driven. It'll require people to choose to develop their land and for projects to happen before a lot of this infrastructure can be built. But we tried to prioritize where we think the first improvements need to be made and then step out in time how things eventually evolve. So probably the nearest term needs are to include improvements to existing roadways, and that includes both Grant Creek, the Grant Creek corridor, and the Cemetery Road corridor, and making the new connection over to Scott Street with a new street that would align with Palmer. We see this development of the residential grid happening in the next 7 years or so, and we're also recommending that we look at connecting Grant Creek to a new signal that would access Reserve Street. So all that helps relieve some of the pressure on the existing roads and provides a little bit more safety. As we move into the next phase, and we're talking about 7 to 14 years out, we'd start to look at some of the other road connections, possibly the industrial road connector, which would provide an alternative access to the landfill, and some additional grid roads happening in the Scott Street district. And then finally, a little bit longer term, looking at the addition of the Howard Racer extension and a new interchange at I-90, continuing to fill out the road network in the Scott Street district and make additional trail connections. And then in the very long term, this is 20 plus years out, we kind of looked at, what's the 20-year horizon on this plan? What could feasibly be done in 20 years, both from a financial standpoint and from a development standpoint. And the projects that were kind of beyond that, we put in this phase 4, 20 plus years out. And these would be things like additional road network in the Grant Creek corridor, maybe another signal on Reserve Street, maybe a new railroad crossing to provide better north-south connectivity up to the interstate. So these things are a long ways out and would require some additional planning. We had a lot of discussion about whether to have the railroad crossing connect to Broadway or connect directly to Russell Street, which is right here. And in the end, we really didn't make a recommendation one way or the other. I think that's something that has to have a lot more discussion, a lot more evaluation of traffic patterns and costs and feasibility. But I think what you'll see in the plan is the idea that it's a good idea to plan for a future north-south connection, because as this area grows and as the rest of Missoula grows, this could be a very valuable connection to help relieve pressure on Scott Street, as well as Orange Street, and as well as Reserve Street, which are all corridors that we already know are in pretty high demand. Okay, so that's kind of it in a nutshell. Our next steps, as I said, we'd like to have plan comments by October 5th, and then we'll be beginning to go through this adoption process. And Laval's going to talk a little bit more about that, how that happens. One of the things we're trying to do with this plan is have it coordinate with the city's growth policy. So we have a growth policy which has a future land use map, and the recommendations in this plan are going to be considered for a growth policy amendment to that future land use map. So Laval's going to talk about that process a little bit, and then we'll be happy to take some questions, and then we'll go back to our open house. Okay.
Thank you. So yes, following up on the North Reserve Scott Street Master Plan and the recommendations from that plan, the city has actually tasked us, the Development Services section of the City of Missoula, with looking at the need to update and propose some changes to the growth policy map so that there's some consistency and it helps to implement the ideas from the master plan. So developing a detailed guiding document like this master plan comes with the need to look at it in relationship to our community-wide policies that are reflected in the growth policy, as well as with the general land use map that we have. So we've reviewed the draft master plan and looked at it through the lens of our community policies and the growth policy, and find that it meets a lot of the goals and objectives and actions of that plan, of the growth policy. Overall, it helps to really support the need to focus development within the core of the city where we already have public infrastructure, but where we also know that there's some needs and we need to work on filling gaps and work on connectivity. So overall, it does a lot towards being consistent with the goals and objectives of our growth policy. One of the areas where we felt that it wasn't quite fitting in relationship was with regards to the land use map. And that actually really wasn't a surprise, because while we were working on wrapping up the growth policy process last year, that was about the same time as when this process was starting up. So we anticipated that the kind of process that this was would provide some additional detail and help to inform the land uses, which is what's happening and what we're here today to talk to you about and show you what we're thinking as far as some changes to the map would go. So this particular slide shows you what the existing current general land uses are for the North Reserve Scott Street area. It shows the regional commercial uses along the Reserve Street corridor, kind of fitting what Jeremy was describing as the larger existing uses, commercial with a regional draw of clientele along the Reserve Street. And then once you go within the core of the study area, it showed the heavy industrial land use designation, a rather large area that's consistent with many uses that are already there, and then also are available for larger land, heavier industrial, more intensive types of industrial. So then we had, as you went further east, some of the lighter purple land use here was light industrial. And that is considered your more typical manufacturing, production, and warehouse types of uses. And we had a designation in here that is called public quasi-public, that's the blue, and that is representing lands that are publicly or quasi-publicly owned and have some kind of common interest concept to them. And then we had a designation of neighborhood mixed use down along the Scott Street corridor, and that was keeping in mind neighborhood types of services and a medium-range residential density that helped to create a transition from the existing neighborhood. So when you look at what the concept map is that the North Reserve Scott Street plan is proposing, you see that it is really taking into consideration some transition from the regional commercial areas over here on the Reserve Street side to the industrial. And then there's a lot of interest in the concept of buffering and transition that is being held and used through the idea of the open space and parks land, as well as an ability to transition through a live-work concept, the industrial transition descriptions that are included in this map, and then that residential itself is a way to transition and blend from the existing neighborhoods. So those are the kinds of things that I see when I'm looking at this concept map. And we want to take those detailed descriptions that are in the master plan and see how they fit and relate to our general land uses that are part of the growth policy. So the future land use map and some changes that we'd be proposing to it are showing up here in this map, and I have a few that are showing up around the stations here as well. And the changes are highlighted with the numbers in this particular map and then described down below. But what it's really doing is telling us and showing, kind of peeling away the regional commercial corridor description. Like we had a pretty wide area for it, and peeling back a bit of the heavy industrial to introduce these transition concepts that are part of the master plan. So we bring into the fold in the mix here the description of community mixed use that fits the commercial concepts that Jeremy was describing, and the light industrial use here that also functions as the transition in this particular Reserve Street district area. Then changes that we're proposing, you see over on the Scott Street side for general land uses, include reducing the amount of the public quasi-public land use and bringing in the introduction of the residential description that you're seeing again in that concept map. And then the hatching that you're seeing on much of this plan up number 6, it's with the asterisks here, 10, 12, 11, and 13. That's indicating the interest in showing a cottage industry use. So that's another way that we can represent the transition and be consistent with the live-work concepts that were talked about in the concept map. So those are some of the primary changes. Again, that cottage industry element and the residential that comes in here and reduces the public quasi-public and makes some changes to the light industrial over on the Scott Street side. The core industrial area stays pretty much the same with the heavy industrial that we've been proposing and is consistent with that industrial reserve. So that's the concept for proposing changes to the growth policy land use map. There is a process in place that's written into that document that talks about how to make targeted growth policy amendments, which is what this would be. And it works us through the process. It says, well, first we should initiate that process at the City Council by talking to them about the reasons for proposing it and indicating or discussing whether there's a public benefit to that. We did go to the City Council, to the Land Use and Planning Committee, and got that go-ahead to initiate this map amendment process. And now we are in the same stage as the master planning process as to looking for public comment. If you are interested in providing comment on this map change, now would be the time, and we can collect comment here today. Then what we will be doing is trying to be consistent and reflecting what's going on with the master plan process and move forward to a planning board review and consideration, and then city council review and adoption of those map changes. So what that looks like is continuing to coordinate with the North Reserve Scott Street process, collecting comments through October 5th. You can submit comments to me at ci.missoula.mt.us or through the North Reserve Scott Street planning process. Through their website, we can discern where comments are coming from and take it from there. And then we will be scheduling a planning board hearing in the city council public hearing. So that will get us an alignment on land use and growth policy. There's still another component of consideration of the master plan itself, which would be a review, a conformity review with planning board. And that will give us the staying power for that plan for consideration during project reviews. So I hope that kind of gets you into an understanding of what the process is going to be, the map amendment that I'm describing, and how it relates to the master plan. After that, I think we're open for questions.
Thanks, Laval. So that's a lot, but why don't we take a few general questions and then we'll break down.
You mentioned the consultant gave a perspective on national something or other to do with this development. What does that mean, national? What does national have to do with it?
Well, they consult all over the United States. So they brought a perspective of what's happening in other communities, both large and small, that they could apply it to what might happen in Missoula. So that was an important perspective. So national trends, changes in the way we work and live, and in industry and commercial activity, I think. And also changes in the way we do land use planning, where we're using more ideas of mixed uses and neighborhood commercial and neighborhood industrial uses that are good fits. Yes, sir, in the back.
Could you back to the slide that shows the industrial core or the interchange proposed?
Is that your slide?
Probably
This
that
guy?
one there.
In here?
And I did hear you say that this is maybe 20 years out, so there's plenty of planning opportunity around it. But I just wondered what the thoughts were about what happens at the north side of that interchange into the North Hills. With more road connections, possibility, it would put pressure on development in that area. And there's a lot more to the east side of it than the current landfill. Carlson's property, Spurlock property, etc.
So it's a question of what happens if you put the interchange in. Are you going to increase development pressure on those properties to the north? The plan suggests that this interchange should really be focused around access and not development of commercial uses and the idea of a truck stop. I think it's an important conversation to have about what happens with the North Hills. It's a little bit beyond what the scope of this plan area was, but that's an important area that needs to be considered, whether it's appropriate to have development or a limited scale of development or to be preserved as open space. So I don't really have a solid answer on that, other than I think when that interchange starts to become a real project, it's going to be an important thing to be thinking about. How does that interchange affect the land to the north?
Jeremy, what triggers interest in that interchange development? Does the city or county approach the feds? Does the state DOT? I don't understand how that works.
Well, it has to be a little of both. I think, first of all, I think development has to happen to the point where the interchange really becomes necessary. And we propose these timelines, which might be, 14 or 15 years away, but you could easily see a scenario where that changes if development happens in a faster way. So to get a new interchange on the interstate, you do have to work with both federal highways and the Montana Department of Transportation to allow that new access. We think the interchange is feasible there from a spacing standpoint on the interstate. So there's a traffic engineering component to that, but I think mostly it's a question of when that interchange would really be needed to support whatever development may happen.
But it's a chicken and egg thing. I mean, you almost have to build the road first to create the demand for the interchange then?
Yeah, to some extent. I could see a scenario where, if you had more intensity happening in the industrial core, that the need to get better truck access in and out of that area would really become, a driving factor for having that interchange.
But I think another aspect of that is as pressure on Missouri Street and Orange Street increases, then the desirability of the interchange becomes way more apparent.
Yeah, one of the things we recognized was that this question about an interchange and a railroad overcrossing really has to be a regional transportation question. It's part of our long-range transportation plan as much as it's part of this district. So we wanted to keep a placeholder in the district planning that you do need that connection. And the list of projects in our transportation plan is always very long, and I think a railroad crossing is in that list somewhere, but it's probably about 250 down the list. So, but at some point that's going to rise up the ladder a little bit.
Two questions. One, so that oil line, I mean, they commit a lot of dollars to that. They run their little crawlers through it. They fly an airplane over it. I mean, it impacts a significant portion of the phase one potential. Is anyone having any real contact or conversations with them about abandoning that, or what that would look like, or relocating it, or is it more just a hope that maybe they'll just abandon it sometime?
We did reach out. CHS is the company that operates the Yellowstone pipeline, and we did talk to them about it. They don't have any plans to abandon it. A portion of the line is still actively used, and the other portion that runs to the north and used to go through the reservation is not being used and hasn't been used for quite a while. They have easements for that line. They have the rights to be there. So it would take some negotiation to buy that easement out. And they're a little bit like railroads. They don't tend to give those things away. So for portions of this plan to happen, you would have to negotiate some of those easements. Or relocate it.
Does that pipe actually have to completely be relocated? Is there no ability to build over that pipeline?
I don't think so. I think they have a 50-foot setback from that pipeline for any building.
You can overcross it with roads.
Yeah, so that's a good point. You might be able to align road corridors with the pipeline corridor. You might be able to use parking and other uses over the top of that pipeline without that effect.
Well, I just want to compliment you on your presentation, both of you, and tell you that it's very exciting to see your vision for what's the future of that whole area. As a native Missoulian, I see the challenge where it is to fuse the industrial with neighborhood housing and with the commercial. And I just wanted to add in that I do that bike route between the Scott area and Reserve Street quite often on my road bike. And I want to communicate the anxiety I do feel along that road when I feel like there's a big truck behind me and all the industrial uses. And I see families there and they're trying to utilize that as a corridor for, Missoula's, for planning family activities, and it would be great to see the bike trails not on against the roads, but out of grass barrier or something between them, because I see a lot of children there by themselves, on all those roads. And I think it would be a nicer community and less anxiety for parents if their children, they knew that they were on those bike trails, away from the roads instead of next to them. And then I also see a big use for integrating into it creative outdoor, play areas and simple, cost-effective, like gyms and stuff in that whole area for children as things unfold, because this is a family community, very isolated and very expensive to leave the communities, and the outcome of that would be just healthier children and families as the community grows.
Great, thank you, good comments. Biking is, I read somewhere that biking is now bigger than golf in terms of recreational activities.
Did you consider bus routes at all?
Yeah, we did talk about bus routes, and one of the things we heard a lot of comment about was the idea of a park and ride up in the Grant Creek area. Mountain Lion has their long-range planning to extend service along Reserve Street. Right now, their planning does not extend anything up north of, I think, Expressway. So hopefully this plan will help them recognize that as this area grows, that extending their bus routes up into that area will be a good future step for them. They serve where there's population density or employment density, so I think some of that development has to happen first before they're going to start moving bus routes, but certainly with a big user like Consumer Direct going in, that's going to help accelerate that process.
So is that green space one block up from where the White Pine Park currently is? If I'm looking at it right, right now it's on Turner, right? And you're moving it up to Palmer?
Yeah, one of the things that we looked at was whether the existing White Pine Park is in the best place.
Okay, so I'm going to follow up on that. So I think our Northside neighborhood and people throughout Missoula fought really hard to have that portion of what is now White Pine Sash cleaned up to residential standards. And it would really not be very nice to just turn it into a park. It was a year-long effort, and I think we should encourage residential development there at all possible. And I'm kind of upset to see it this way on the map. But,
Because we're taking away potential residential property.
well, and also negating all the efforts that people in our neighborhood, devoted an extreme amount of time to. I think it should reflect, what the neighborhood wanted, fought for. And I also think it's, we just put that park in, so. And I realize that it looks like that on the map because it's nice proximity to the new residential areas. But I think that's something to consider.
The primary thing we were trying to do there was connect the park better to the residential neighborhood so that you didn't have to cross a busy street to get to it.
Well, it depends on what kind of neighborhood you're coming from. If you're coming from my house, it's my worst spot. So it's looking at the new part you're developing versus what's there already. It all depends on where you live and where your kids are, how easy that is to access.
Okay.
You mentioned adding 2 new signal intersections on Reserve Street. I can't let you get away with that without a comment. But we don't need any more signals on Reserve Street. We need roundabouts.
I think I need to change it to intersection control instead of signal.
But you've got signal on your plan. You mentioned it twice tonight. You need to be thinking differently.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a big fan of roundabouts. I don't know if roundabouts on Reserve Street are feasible or not, but I think it should certainly be considered.
And they don't have to be warrants.
That's right.
Well, that's right.
They don't have to be warrants.
Right.
So just for the record again, Jeremy, I know you're very familiar with it, but we're really excited about phase 1. We're excited about our property, which we completed purchase on this year. And we've actually already had 3 offers purchase our property, which we have no intents on, but we would like to do some further development on the Maverick Motorsports property, that corner right there on that I-90, slot. We don't have the greatest ingress, egress. I mean, it's a little bit of a mess as it is. The plan currently does not recognize access into there, which I understand this is a longer-term plan, but we are part of phase one. I just want to encourage you to maybe address that a little sooner. We would love to make changes and begin some of our development ideas, which would also, which would include increasing the size of the building or completely changing the building, tearing down a part of the building, and even facing it, as you suggested, in a way that's more appealing to Reserve Street. But we'd also like to add on, do some additional, possibly some additional structures. But we can't make any of those decisions until there's at least some acknowledgement of how, people are going to get in and out of our building or into that property. A right in, right out is not a possibility because of that, the way that intersection and that lighting goes underneath the I-90 as it is. And I'd also like to say I like roundabouts too.
Good, yeah, I would just say that, investing in a new intersection and maybe some road realignment here, you really want to, the reason to do that, the reason the city would invest in that is to really see all of these properties achieve their highest and best use. And so access to those properties is one of the impediments right now. So that signal or roundabout should really improve the access to that whole corner of the district.
So it's 8 o'clock. We've been at it for an hour and a half. We'd really like to have the last part of the open house. And I note that there's not a lot of comments on some of the stations. And before you get out of here, we'll be at each one of the stations. Please stop by. We'll help facilitate your comments and get them up on the board, because that's one of the most important parts of tonight's meeting. We really appreciate the question and answer.
Yeah, great. So thank you. This is Nick Kaufman. You can grab him. Kate Dinsmore is in the back here. She can take comments. You all met Laval. We also have several folks from the redevelopment agency here. Annette, raise your hand back here in the corner. Chris Bean and Ellen Buchanan. So you're welcome to grab any one of us and bend our ear. Thank you.